looking to build AI that's going to ultimately serve all of us, we need to be able to have assurance labs that are representative of all of us. There's a real cost to it, though, that I think we need to be honest with ourselves about. You don't necessarily need a call center to help schedule patients because you can have an AI, but everybody in that call center for that large health system doesn't have a job anymore. And as a doctor, it's at once terrifying and exhilarating to, be part of a very challenging work environment and have AI come around and potentially disrupt all of that to create a new incentive structure.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to ReAligned Healthcare podcast. We have a great guest with us today, Brian Anderson, CEO and one of the founding members of CHAI, Coalition for Healthcare AI. Brian, great to have you.
Yauheni, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be here with you.
Brian, it seemed that a lot of things being developing with Coalition of Healthcare AI, and unless you truly engage in this in a day-to-day activity, it's very hard to even keep track of. Can you just quickly tell us what you're up to, how things are developed, and what you guys are currently building?
Yeah, so CHAI started 3 years ago when a group of doctors, researchers, and technology companies came together trying to create a set of technically specific consensus best practice frameworks in health AI. We recognize that we don't have that yet, and we urgently need it. In a consequential space like health, you need to have a common shared definition of what good looks like, and you need to have an ability to ensure that an AI model is aligned with that definition. And so that's what we've been focused on. We've published a number of technical documents around this. We're standing up quality assurance labs to help validate that models are performing well and are being built in a responsible way. Our membership is amazing. We have over 4,000 organizations that are part of CHAI, so I'm humbled and honored to be part of it. Candidly, it's pretty exciting work that we're doing.
Wow, large group, 4,000 participants, and it seems to be growing. So, how do you even follow the pace of a current innovation? Because every time you open Twitter, there is yet another model or yet something new, and it's hard to test it as a user. I imagine testing it from an assurance lab perspective is even more complicated. So in this dynamic world, how do you create a system that's robust enough to be safe, but at the same time not prevent and slow down the speed of innovation?
I would say that, at a high level, Yauheni, it's certainly an effort that is going to take a large community to be able to do it. So, there's a variety of different efforts, but all of these require, communities essentially that are willing to lean in. Looking at the assurance lab one as an example, right? We could not create a capability of evaluating models, AI models on, representative population sets of data across the U.S. Like one assurance lab couldn't possibly do that. So it takes a community. And so if we're looking to build AI that's going to ultimately serve all of us, we need to be able to have assurance labs that can test models that come from data sets that are representative of all of us. So you need, you need a geographically diverse set of labs that can draw patients from Appalachia, from inner city Chicago, from rural Kansas, and the urban centers of Boston, where I'm at. And so that's been the strategy. It's been really to work with a large, diverse group of stakeholders. You can't create a set of frameworks in the technology space that keep pace with the kind of innovation that you're doing if all you have are the incumbent, entrenched players. Right. And if you don't have startups that are innovating and disrupting a lot of, those entrenched incumbents that maybe have a completely different use case or a completely different approach, then you're missing. Then you're missing a lot of the relevancy of these kinds of frameworks if you're not be able to keep up. And so, to that point, right, we have, all the big entrenched incumbents, but we have over 1,000 startups that are part of this community as well. And so that's been our approach. Diversity of stakeholders, different approaches coming from different parts of the U.S.
And out of a lot of participants, do you guys have mostly people from the industry, from AMC, from representative groups? Because I think one of the important questions when you look at that is how you ensure that people who create regulation, right, also not the one who disproportionately potentially benefit from this regulation.
Yeah. So the short answer is we do have health systems that are in the lower resource space. We also have a lot of academic health systems. CHAI was started by 4 of them: Johns Hopkins, Stanford, Duke, and Mayo. And over the past 3 years, we've been growing the membership to include a number of health systems that are, in the rural space, federally qualified health systems, critical access hospitals. I mean, I'll be honest with you and say, do we have adequate representation? No, I would genuinely want more representation. That kind of regulatory capture where, as an example, right, if one of the regulations was every health system has to have, a robust AI governance committee. Every critical access hospital would, overnight be disenfranchised from being able to participate in the AI revolution because, some of these places just don't have the staff or the resources to stand up, a committee on the fly like that. AMCs might be able to, but not FQHCs. And so, those are the examples of where we're trying to make sure that we have adequate representation and we give equal weight to those voices.
Perfect. So quick shout out for everyone who's listening who may be representing the FQHC and the smaller, please reach out to CHAI and join the revolution. What about patients? Because we're talking about industry player, we're talking about government, AMC, and clinics, but regular users, people who actually may benefit the most and potentially also have the personal vested risks when AI malfunction.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Two thoughts on the patient side. So you want patients to be at the center of every use case where, it's relevant and it's appropriate in the healthcare delivery space. Oftentimes, patients should be at the center of every one of those use cases. In some of the life sciences, like molecule discovery, it's more scientific. That might not make sense. But in the use cases where we're developing the best practice frameworks, you want to make sure that a patient, as an example, is consulted in the design and development of the model first. You want, for example, if I'm developing a model on breast cancer detection in middle-aged women on their mammograms, in the development of that model, I might want to make sure that I'm talking to a representative sample of patients and, what they're experiencing, what they're going through with their doctor and how a tool might help them and their doctor. You'd also want doctors, right? Radiologists or oncologists to be part of those conversations. And so we have patient advocates in all those working groups working in CHAI. The other one, I think, maybe a little different way of thinking about it is in this like direct to consumer or direct to patient space, which is sort of not in the traditional way we think about healthcare delivery where, a doctor and a patient are in an exam room and, having an encounter. In the direct to consumer space, it's more about, every one of us is a patient, every one of us is a consumer. And in the health consumer space, as an example, we have apps on our phones that we use. We go to websites that, help us navigate, whatever it is that we're looking to navigate. And AI is oftentimes very frequently used, sometimes opaquely, sometimes transparently. And so in that specific space, we've launched a specific effort with patients, again, obviously in mind, because it's technology companies coming directly to you. What are the responsible ways to develop AI for the use in the consumer space or the patient consumer space.
As a user, I have to say that my personal biggest concern and thing that I personally would hate to see is that we ended up with something as our cookie banner or something related to access to some of our devices. Why? Because intention were awesome. We were trying to kind of give transparency about what's going on, what kind of data you have in access. On the same time, the ultimate execution and the way the system was built around this became less educational, more of a nuisance for the people, because a lot of the time, unfortunately, people still click on, right? And people still allow application to access everything and take all the risks and admitting that no one actually reads whatever they're accepting to. So how can we ensure that those regulation and those informational parts, like truly benefiting and helping to make smarter decision, not just creating yet another pop-up nuisance for end customers, and frankly also for clinicians, because we can do the same for practicing physicians too.
I mean, it's the really important space that you're talking about, which is where the rubber hits the road, when that tool is actually in use by that provider, where the doctor is experiencing that pop-up on the computer screen. And, as a doctor, I'll be the first to tell you, how you experience an EHR, an electronic health record, varies from configuration to configuration. And, part of how these AI models are going to be configured greatly, if not fundamentally, affects how effective they are going to be. As an example, you bring up the pop-up, story. There were many times when, as a practicing clinician, you get a pop-up. I got a pop-up and I got annoyed at it and sort of didn't, I'll be honest and say there were times maybe I didn't even read it. I was just frustrated and trying to get through my encounter so I could spend more time talking to my patients and less time kind of looking at the things that were assaulting me on the computer screen. And that's an example, if that was an AI tool, where it wasn't configured right? There's a level, it's, the technical term is like human cognitive bias, where I am being biased to not listen to that output, even though it might be the right output, the best output that I could take, the best recommendation I could take. But I'm not listening to it because cognitively it's not coming at the right time in my decision making. Whereas another pop-up might come just at the right time. And it might be a horrible recommendation, but it caught me at the right time. And so I'm going to listen to it. And that, I think, is an example where it's really important that we're watching not about how well the model performs, but the actual clinical outcome, right? In this case, it might be, a recommendation for a specific therapeutic option for a patient I have in front of me. And so the right kind of metric to watch in these instances where a model's deployed and being used in a clinical concept is it helping the patient? Is it leading to the clinical outcome that ultimately, I am a doctor am here for? And so there's like a lot of different ways that we think about evaluating these models, but you point on one of the really important ones, which is we got to be watching how these models are working, in real life, generating real world evidence on their benefit or their harm. I think, to speak a minute about, drugs and therapeutics and other kind of sectors of the health economy, we have surveillance or post-market surveillance networks for drugs, for medical devices, for vaccines. We don't have that for AI tools. We know that when drugs are approved, they were approved because they showed that they benefited, a specific group of people. It might be as many as 50,000 people. That's a big clinical trial. But we don't know how it's actually working on the millions, tens of millions of people once it's approved, right? And so we have these post-market surveillance networks that monitor how they're actually working once doctors are prescribing them. And so we need something like that for AI.
That's great. I really like this point. And a lot of infrastructure already being developed. And I think in your previous roles, you contributed significantly to infrastructure development related to fire. So from a very practical perspective, I think now it's informatician in me is in talking. If now you're talking about potentially monitoring real world effectiveness as well as providing recommendation for deployments, in your recommendation from the group from Chai, will you recommend deployment processes? Because ultimately, if you have significant variability on the way you bring this model to a clinician or to a patient, you will have different effectiveness. So will you define the same way as we define IV versus oral? Will you define, okay, this particular model can be embedded in this view of the EHR, and if it's not, then we cannot guarantee effectiveness?
Yeah, so we're going to be launching a specific, fairly large effort early next year in the clinical decision support space. It's going to be our clinical decision support, or CDS working group. And that effort is going to dig into this exact clinical configuration utilization space. Chai, is a fantastic organization with, broad membership and many experts. One of the really important groups that we're working with that will be front and center in the CDS working group are the clinical societies, the specialty societies, right? I believe that doctors trust the specialty societies that they're part of to be the stewards and curators of the guidelines for, specific kinds of diseases or specific kinds of protocols and treatment modalities for, everything ranging from, heart disease to cancer. And it's not on Chai to create what those specific, nuanced, what I'll say specialty specific considerations are. That's where we want to partner with these specialty societies to drill into exactly what you're describing, Yauheni. It's like, yes, we need to have an ability to say, like, this is what the best practice is in the use of AI tools. I'll make something up here. In the use of AI tools for helping to determine, what protocol might be best for a specific patient. And, and then the specifics might be, the tool, we recommend that the tool give a recommendation before the encounter, and maybe asynchronous to, specific follow-up visits. There's some ability for the AI tool to help providers, make sure the patient is compliant on protocol, et cetera. That's just as an example. I wouldn't want Chai to make that on its own. I'd want to partner with the American Society for Clinical Oncology, ASCO, about that.
And that's make total sense. I personally would not trust the guidelines that's coming in oncology from Chai. I'm sorry, Brian. So it's great to partner with key societies, and I assume you'll be working with other groups that's potentially more heavily involved in informatics, like AMIA, for example, to find optimal decision support, launching points, and other things. Okay, enough with informatics. We got a little bit deeper for an average listener. So let's talk about exciting stuff, because ultimately all of this is in the name of realignment and optimization of things that's going on in the healthcare system. And where do you think a lot of this is moving? All right, based on what you see, and you're certainly seeing way more than most of us in the type of a model and type of application that's coming into market. Where do you think things will move in 2-5 years? I think 10 is a little bit too much to predict.
Yeah, gosh, there's so many ways to answer that. I guess maybe let me first speak just broadly in the health space. Certainly AI is going to be more ubiquitous and ever present in many of the day-to-day tasks that we have. And, as these large generative models, very capable of helping us navigate our day-to-day lives, of which there are many kind of components or intersections with our health, I think these models, these generative models in particular, will start to be trained or tuned with all of the kinds of health data that is unique to me, my health story, and how a model can help you both navigate complex questions or issues, assist you in navigating a health system's scheduling or the benefit for a claim, or help answer specific questions that you may be looking to search for. I think is going to be really impactful and really important for all of us to get ready for. And obviously the importance in that, as it relates to CHAI, is how do we make sure that these models are actually advocating for you and what your values are and what your priorities are versus mine, or versus the CEO of the technology company in Silicon Valley that created the model, or who the model was trained on. I mean, these are really, I think, important questions that, as the use of AI and the use cases continue to expand and become part of our everyday life, that we really need to think about. Now, on the provider side, I think within the next 2 to 5 years, the majority of providers in the US are going to be using AI to assist them in clinical decision making. I think the potential benefit is just so large that it will very likely be, I don't know if it will be 2 years, probably closer to 5 years, I will use the term a standard of care, that doctors should be relying on these tools to assist them in thinking about what kinds of diagnoses, what kinds of therapeutics might be appropriate and most beneficial to their patients. It'll help us with diagnoses. It'll help us with therapeutic options. It'll help us with screening patients for the typical kinds of cancers. I think also importantly, hopefully, maybe this is the optimist in me, it'll help providers have a more fulfilling professional life, and probably personal life, or a well-rounded life. Burnout is such an issue. Many of your listeners probably are aware of that already. My hope is that AI will help unburden providers from some of the more mundane parts of their work that are really overwhelming and crushing a lot of nurses and a lot of doctors.
I like this vision, because a lot of us went to medical school to truly deliver care, not necessary to do after-hours notes and filling the billing forms. So let's double down on this a little bit. So from your perspective, in the things you see, right? What would be the evolving role of a clinician, nurse, physician? Because now a lot of the thing that's we traditionally over the last decade added into the clinician plate for documentation, for example, especially with a wider adoption of EHR, can be done by smarter agents who can document based on my actions, my decision, my discussion with the patient. So do you think what will be the main task? Because I'll tell you, as a physician, I hope that the main goal will be somewhere around me spending more time with patients, not scaling me as a clinician to yet even higher cohorts of patients. So maybe share your vision, like where you would like it to go.
It's a great question. So I'm not a health economist, and so I'll speak in this space maybe a little bit out of ignorance and with certainly a lot of humility. When I think about the health AI revolution that's happening, one of the lessons I try to draw from is when sewing machines were invented back in the mid 1800s, when it really gained steam and they become more widespread. I think there was a lot of concern then, and many subsequent examples of innovative technologies that came and then widely adopted, but a lot of concern about disruption, workforce replacement, or it's only going to make me work harder, and it's not going to improve the quality of life. There are many, many examples in the past. The example of the sewing machine's invention is just one where yeah, there was a lot of disruption, and there was a lot of, concern, strikes, that were going on during that time. But ultimately what it led to was, a kind of flourishing for, women's suffrage and the women's rights movement. There's a real reason why the women's suffrage movement happened, just a little bit after the invention of the sewing machine, right? It freed a large portion of our population from a very mundane, very burdensome task of, creating the clothing that we wear, and doing that very slowly. You created more opportunity for people to do things that they found more value in, that they could be more impactful to society with. And, the benefit, we saw, 10 to 20 years later with the women's suffrage movement. My hope, similarly, to connect the dots back here to doctors, is that it's not going to be just, I'm just going to be scaled now to see 50 patients instead of the 20 that I see now, but it's going to create opportunity for doctors to lean into areas where they find more value. I think the call to arms for my fellow doctors is to do that, so that the narrative isn't one where you're just scaled to see 50 patients, but it's one to where, what do I hope, where your time is freed to more meaningfully engage with your patients in ways that no AI ever could. And doing that with the freedom and opportunity to not worry about, I think as we're kind of talking about, the documentation and scaring at the screen, because you got an AI tool to do that for you now. You can be a doctor and live in the moment in a very meaningful way that, allows a rebirth, if you will, of the art of medicine powered by AI.
I like this vision. And to be honest, I think about this a lot, because if we go back to, 100 years, maybe even more, as a physician in a smaller practice, you had an ability not only to practice, but to publish your own cases and do research. And right now, unless you have a dedicated time in AMC, this is pretty much lost art. The only things you do as a frontline physician right now is to see your cohorts and work in a factory-like settings to make things happen. So certainly the hope is that AI will allow to bring this new efficiency and tooling directly to the front staff when they can start doing in discovery, as famous lead in water.
But Yauheni, just to interrupt, sorry to interrupt, but you're exactly right that, the frontline clinicians, their incentive structure, is to see patients, right? I get paid for the patients I see. A researcher, a principal investigator at an AMC, they get paid a salary, and oftentimes a portion of that salary is just for the research time, right? And they're not necessarily incentivized to see as many patients. But so I think you're touching on, one of the key concerns I have, at least, and this is the reason why I'm sort of advocating that I think providers, nurses need to lean in and speak up about this, is that if we don't think carefully about the alignment of incentives moving forward in a world powered by AI, we do run the risk of that dystopian future that you were alluding to, where it's, one doctor seeing, 100 patients simultaneously, or, something silly like that, because that's the current incentive structure, right? See as many patients as you can, bill as much as you can, and move on to the next patient. I don't want to live in a world where, as a doctor, I'm now seeing none of my patients in a meaningful way, and I'm having, AI agents seeing 100 patients simultaneously. I think you would lose a lot of doctors in that future.
Let's double down on this topic of discussion. After all, we're on ReAligned Healthcare podcast. Doctors will definitely, especially if you talk with some tech innovators, expected to start monitor even more chatbots or agents that's taking care of patients. And I even heard the concepts where people proposing where doctors can share their medical license, right, and hire bots to practice under the license with a full risk sharing around that, which pretty much bring the model where AI agent is almost like your mid-level, right? That's you practicing with under collaborative practice agreement. Very dystopian future, very dystopian. So, but it may happen. And in the spirit of a podcast topic of realigned healthcare, where do you think we can apply either policy or maybe financial incentive to ensure that's not where we're going?
Yeah. So I would say at a policy level, one of the really exciting things about AI is, well, let me actually step back at a unit economic level. One of the exciting things about AI is that it really has the opportunity to address, the profit center, the cost driver, however you want to look at it, of health, which is the patient-doctor encounter, right? We've had so many digital health revolutions, but none of them have really gotten to that inner circle of like a tool that is potentially capable or more capable than a doctor to engage in a patient encounter that, yes, that's the billable moment. And so when you think about creating policies in a future world where you need to realign the incentive structure, because now, the ability to increase the supply side, meaning the potential doctors or their chatbot overlords, isn't an issue because I can create as many kind of chatbots as I want for myself to practice medicine. We need to have a realignment of what we're actually looking to incentivize. It's not seen. It shouldn't be. This is my thesis. It shouldn't be seen as many patients. It really should be tied to the kinds of clinical outcomes that we want to drive. And well, you might say, well, but that still could potentially incentivize a chatbot seeing 1 million patients simultaneously if the chatbot's, the best doctor in the world and is delivering, outstanding care. My response to that is like, well, if that's the case, then that's the future we should be shooting for. Because at the end of the day, we're doctors not because, we want to be doctors. We're doctors because we want to help our patients live healthier, better lives. And if an AI tool ultimately can do that better than a doctor, then I think we need to be very thoughtful in how we use that AI for patients because they're the center of what we should be concerned about, not, my job security.
I'm actually surprisingly okay with
that.
The whole
I don't know how many of your listeners will be.
No, let's look from population health perspective, right? Unfortunate reality is at scale, we have a lot of care variability. It's just how it is, especially geographic variability in the care delivery. And we're starting to come to a very clear conclusion based on the tool that's getting progressively smarter, that if you deploy the tool at scale for very predictable condition, you likely will do better than all of us as a physician groups on average. And that's okay. We just need to ensure that we're not putting patients into those echo chambers of a chatbots that you have no exits from, where unfortunately when the chatbot is wrong or when the chatbot cannot find the proper way to manage you actually have a quick, easy way to exit the system. But I think as a primary system, we may get a lot of the efficiency and safety back into that and allow to reapply a lot of our resources into something that's way more impactful. And that's beyond just standard education phrases, right? That we say as a clinician after the visit.
Agreed. I mean, the excitement is like, what is that future exactly going to look like? And, as a doctor, it's at once terrifying and exhilarating, right? Many of us have spent decades training and preparing our lives to be the competent, trusted doctor that we are. And then to, be part of a very challenging work environment for the past, 10, 15, 20 years, to that and have AI come around and potentially disrupt all of that to create a new incentive structure. I think one that, candidly, I think maybe you and I both agree we need a realignment around what these incentives are if the supply side is potentially not going to be as big of an issue, or we need to at least think about it in a different way, what that future, exactly looks like. I'm hopeful about, what I said earlier in terms of doctors being able to lean into more meaningful parts of their work, and finding value, and hopefully, the types of compensation that nurses and doctors should demand. But we'll see.
Do you think that's our current healthcare system setup with significant large for-profit entities that's been managing both insurers as well as owning physical groups are positioned to even consider this type of the role? Because when you're a for-profit entity, your goal is to drive the shareholder value. This is the definition of the corporate. And everything that does not drive shareholder value kind of misalign. Of course, you have a lot of a mission statement and you're trying to do better by doing good. But in essence, there is a very clear primary incentive, right? And the way you're doing business. So just out of curiosity, and of course, this is opinion of Brian, personally, not Chai, do you think our system is even capable of kind of creating a system where we're mostly focusing on individual benefits, even with technology, or we kind of past this point?
The optimist in me would say, I would say collectively we're capable of whatever we, set our mind to, and the limits are only the things that we put in front of us around that. That may sound kind of very trite or flippant, but time and time again, when a technology or a tool is invented, on the other side of that invention, is a different future. And oftentimes, if it's disruptive enough, it reaches the level of needing to change the overall frameworks for things like how we incentivize, how we think about the economy in health. And, for-profit health systems make a profit because, right, they drive value and their shareholders realize that. And I think, that's a great example where, you have the current incentive structure is rewarding health systems that, are very efficient and very good at having a loyal patient base that go to see their doctor, that get care at the hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. And, hopefully that's, good quality care. And, patients aren't loyal to hospitals or doctors that give bad care. And I would say, a future world with AI doesn't necessarily need or mean that for-profit health systems can't be part of a meaningful, potential realignment about how we think about the practice of medicine. I think there's room for not-for-profit and for-profit entities to coexist and deliver, outstanding care. You have many technology companies that are now in the for-profit space that are really delivering, real, impactful care. Let's look at what happened in the pandemic. Like over 90% of providers were using many technology companies' platforms to deliver care. And then you had technology platforms that have been following suit, employing doctors to deliver care. And I think that's okay. It's up to patients as consumers to really kind of, from my perspective at least, separate the winners from the losers in terms of, those organizations or companies that are delivering good quality care that's convenient, affordable, timely, whatever the metric is that is the metric and important to, the consumer group, those companies will win.
I see it. And to be honest, when you look on the ReAligned technology, internet or software, the main goal and the role was always disintermediation, right? So you can start doing something faster where you before had a very middleman. And our system has a lot of middlemen right now. And I think one of the futuristic questions in the future, especially when you talk about the payers and the role payers play specifically across distribution of funds, or maybe finding appropriate care and helping to guard better care qualities approaches. Do you think we need as many middlemen? And do you think AI in the current breeds will help us to make our system leaner? So we don't really have that many people standing between you as a clinician and me as a patient.
I hope so. I mean, it's a tough question to answer, Yauheni, because, right, at the end of that is someone who has a job, who has a family, who has, kids that are depending on, their parent to have a job to bring food to the table. And so, we talk somewhat aloofly about, if that's a word, about, disruptive technologies and the benefit that they have. There's a real cost to it, though, that I think we need to be honest with ourselves about. And yeah, I mean, if these models create the kinds of efficiencies, just as an example, where you don't necessarily need a call center to help schedule patients because you can have an AI tool that does that really efficiently. But everybody in that call center for that large health system, doesn't have a job anymore. And yeah, there's real efficiency that's created from that, potentially a benefit to society. But how do we think about retraining or upskilling those individuals that, potentially lost their job? Again, I'm not an economist. I don't have all the answers here, but I know that's something that we need to honestly face, square on, and not pretend that that's not going to be a reality for at least, a significant portion of the people that work in the healthcare delivery space.
It's a good question, and I think we're just verbalizing and will not be answering it. Is if you have 5 people who are currently standing in your clinical journey or healthcare journey between you getting acceptance for the drug and not, do you care more about getting access to this drug faster and more efficiently, or employment of those particular 5 peoples? No further comment about this. I think everyone colloquially can think about it. Let's switch a little bit, because you had so much experience building interoperability system and bringing our system together. And it's been a huge change. First, we started to deploying EHR, then we tried to connect it and liberate the data across that. And it's been a huge transformation. And I only been around in this industry for a decade, but it's feel like forever, because most of us started on paper, where getting a lab result and a printout was kind of the state of the art things, and fax still ruled the world, and it's still pretty prevalent, but not as much anymore. And now we're talking about integrated AI and super large language models and a lot of other futuristic stuff. At the same time, there is constantly the feeling that we could have done even more, we could have done even better with everything we did with a meaningful use and a deployment. So with that in mind, as a person who been on the front line in a lot of those initiatives, what do you think we can learn from the process so we do not repeat this during this current wave of AI deployments, especially knowing all this incredible value that generative AI can bring?
That's a deep question. I guess part of, one of the things that I've learned from all of the interoperability work that, we've been focused on for the better part of, almost 20 or so years now, is, a focus on what really matters. And, as we've kind of, went through the interoperability journey, part of the reason why we launched that was because we wanted to improve healthcare, right? Clinical outcomes for patients. You go to one hospital and then you go across the street and your medical record isn't across the street. That just happens to be where you landed in the emergency department with a potential heart attack. right? You want the doctors there to have access to your records from the other side of the street, the other hospital. And so we created all these kind of steps of interoperability. And we almost got lost in the forest of all those things. Like, as an example, like, we came up with really important performance metrics that were not the actual clinical outcome that we were measuring, but like, did you do X, Y, and Z? Did you, test your A1C, which is a blood test for diabetes patients, every 3 months? Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you, structure the data in such a way that, you documented smoking cessation questions accurately? And I think that there was a lot of cost associated with creating, I would say, perhaps some cumbersome and overly burdensome hoops that people had to jump through because we weren't focused on that outcome. And I think AI has the opportunity to allow us to really just focus on, the things that matter and keeping those things first. And if we're looking to kind of create the, regulatory frameworks that allow us to realize the whole potential of the benefit of AI in health, one of the lessons that I've appreciated from the world and the experience of interoperability is that we don't create overly burdensome regulations and not put first the thing that we really can have the opportunity to focus on. So that's one. I think the other is, it's so unfortunate that the interoperability adoption curve followed, if I were to pull up a list of the most well-funded, resourced, profitable, you choose your metric that relates to income, revenue, list of hospitals, and looked at kind of their adoption of, the interop standards and the technology around it, it would, follow that list pretty closely in terms of, the ones most resourced were the ones first adopt, the ones less resourced are the ones just now kind of getting to it, 15 years later. I hope that we don't have that same experience. I really do with AI. And so we need to, if we can think about creating the kinds of incentive structures to bring those lesser resourced health systems along, I think it's going to be so much more beneficial. The risk, I think, is even more exquisite in AI, because in interoperability, we're just talking about, connecting pipes under the hood so data can flow. And maybe, some EHR hospitals have, amazing, still pipes. Others, maybe it's not so high quality. The EHRs might be not as good. In AI, though, the tool itself, through processes like reinforcement learning or just initial training and tuning, are dependent upon having access to diverse different kinds of data sets that oftentimes come from those lesser resourced health systems. And so you can get into a virtuous cycle or a very non-virtuous cycle with AI, where if you start seeing a trend where those that are adopting it, that are making their data available for training, tuning, improving iteration of the model performance, only being health systems that have, highly educated, suburban, urban, wealthy, Caucasian people, you're going to have tools that are only going to be successful in those environments. And that would be a real shame, and I think a disaster for our society when you're essentially just reinforcing the digital divide in a way that is potentially very damaging.
I completely agree. And it's great to hear from a CEO of potentially the largest healthcare AI group that we're trying to build not overly burdensome systems. So please keep helping us to stay away from overly burdensome stuff. And I really like the part around the presence of clear alignment with underserved groups and hospitals, because if we cannot build a system we all need without their participation, it's a very different value proposition compared to when we just need to ensure they're connected and not be left out. Because here you truly cannot move forward without their participation, and that's kind of switching the script significantly. So Brian, over your career, and it's not uniquely applied to CHAI or MITRE or other groups, you've seen all the sides of the equation. You're seeing physician side, you're seeing the payer side, and the patient side. Where do you think we have the strongest misalignment? And if you had a magic wand, what would you do?
Great question. So this is Brian, personal Brian speaking, not CEO of CHAI. Probably the greatest misalignment I see is me, because of my personal experience as a doctor, that there's misalignment in terms of how health systems and providers are incentivized. I think there are obviously plans and payers out there that incentivize providers around, clinical outcomes. Look at Medicare Advantage, look at some of the accountable care organizations, ACOs, and others that are out there, developing frameworks that are incentivizing paying providers and nurses for their performance, for the clinical outcomes that improve in the patients that they see. But that's a minority of, the overall healthcare delivery space in the U.S. And even in those markets where, we have Medicare Advantage, the incentive structures still aren't perfect. And so you still have situations where you have doctors that aren't deriving meaning and value from their practice. I think one of the more sobering statistics in this space that I think speaks to this misalignment is, right, in the U.S., we have to graduate each year 2 whole medical school classes of physicians just to account for the doctors that commit suicide each year. And it's a sad statistic. I know many physician colleagues, classmates in medical school of mine that aren't with us anymore because of that, because they, committed suicide. And I think it speaks to the profound misalignment in how medicine is practiced and delivered and experienced by providers and by patients. If we can find a way, again, I'm not an economist, I'm not an expert in this space, but if we can find a way to realign those incentive structures and the experience of work for providers, and hopefully powered by AI, that kind of flourishing that I hope is on the other side of this revolution for doctors, I think that'd be wonderful. And I'm ready to partner with all the physicians out there around that. That's why I think we have over 600 or 700 health systems that are part of CHAI right now. We're in this together.
It's certainly sad and sobering statistics when you look around. And I think from my side, one of the calls to clinicians, especially now when there are so many opportunities to contribute, is to get active, to ensure that you've been heard, that you participate. I know it's hard. I know it's very hard to find time, especially in a busy day. But I don't think we will be heard unless we're talking about it. And now is the time. Now is the time where the tools are coming. Now is the time where there is a real opportunity to change. And maybe, and it's interesting that I'm already seeing it across many clinical specialties, where simple practice settings where you may not participate in insurance and just work as a direct primary care may also be an option. So AI may give the raise to a lot of other and alternative practice models. So I think overall, Brian, if you look in the next 5 to 10 years, do you feel optimistic? Do you feel neutral, pessimistic? What's your view?
I would say optimism for sure. there hasn't been an example yet in human history where we've had an innovation and the motivation to use it and to, control it in a way that doesn't benefit human society. Now, we've had unintended consequences. Just look at social media as an example, where you invent these tools and, greater connection, deeper connection, all that's fantastic. Unintended consequence. I have 2 teenage daughters. I see the consequences of social media. But at the same time, the benefits of having real meaningful connection to people, I would assert, are equally valid and perhaps even more potent. In the healthcare space, I really, believe that even though AI is an invention, like certainly generative AI is an invention like none I think we've ever had before, to create the kind of super intelligence that is smarter than you or I or all of us combined. There are different things that we need to consider in that. But I think with the kind of motivation that we have as humans to create the kinds of guidelines and guardrails that will protect us and enable us to use these tools to serve all of us, I think we can do it. I think we just need to be very sober-eyed about the importance that we need to ensure that these tools are aligned to our values. And if they're not, when we use them in consequential spaces like health, where everyone's a patient, everyone's a caregiver, we're going to be in trouble if we don't have that kind of assurance around the alignment of these models to what we value and what we want for our health.
Thank you, Brian. And certainly we all wish you and Shai success, because we all badly need this as a society, as physicians, and frankly, as all the patients. So thank you for stopping by for our episodes. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. And hopefully, in a year or two, we can bring you back so we can learn more about what's happened and about all the model that's hopefully by then will be in production. So thank you.
Let's do it. Let's make it a date, Yauheni. I'll look forward to it. And thanks for having me here. It's been a real pleasure.